The Daas Tevunos, and we're on page Tzadik Gimel. And the last thing we learned about the sugya that we're in is, where does Ra come from? We spent days on this through the Ramchal. We read the English, that God did not directly create Ra. God directly created only one hashpah, and that's the hashpah of Toiv. And from that hashpah of Toiv, the Rebbeinu Shalom in there in phase one created just Toiv. And then through a process of what happened to the Toiv in that original particle, we called it, using the Ramban's words, the Yuli particle. In that particle, an undifferentiated particle, there were all things in there, and there was the potential for chisaron, the potential for a reduction of the toiv. And then as HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creating from there, from that particle, he's putting different things together. He's taking out from the particle and putting together a lion. He's taking out from the particle and putting together a tulip, etc. In this particle, he's taking out this concept of chaser, that something can be lacking. And as he combines this lacking with other things, in that second phase of creation, we have things that are imperfect and are lacking. And that's where Ra comes from. It's not a direct, the word we use, and it's not a direct emanation from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a second stage from creation. The next thing the Ramchal pointed out on page Tzadik Beis is that we need to be careful when we talk about creation, and we talk about this particle, and we talk about God taking things out of this particle. We should not talk about God, we should not be talking about God had the potential to create the world long before he created it. Again, there's a time issue that we talked about. Whenever we say God could have created the world before he created it, it's an absolutely, it's a catch-22. It makes no sense. The concept of time was not here. The only thing that was here was God. There was no time. God is HaYehovah V'yeh. He's past, present, and future. He doesn't live inside a concept of time. And since nothing was here except him, there was no time. God created time with the sun and the moon and the orbits. Time came into being. But before all those things were created, it's only God. And God lives in something called eternity, whatever that is. It was, is, and always will be, and was, is, always, and will be defies time, and there was no time when it was only God. Therefore, that question, what was here before the world was created, is a question that you can't ask because there's no before. But you also have to be careful when you start talking about God always, again, always is a concept of time, but that's the way we need to talk. God always had the potential to create the world. It just happens to be that for every reason he decided 5,781 years ago, he decided that the potential world should become the real physical world, and he finally did it. He could have done it much before then, but he decided to actually do it 5,781 years ago, but in potential it could have been done before. So the Ramchal warned us, as Friedlander explained beautifully, you cannot talk that way. If you talk that way, you're running the danger of getting to the non-believers, the apikursis of kadmus ha'olam. This is the way Aristotle wrote, and this is the way the other philosophers wrote, that something pre-existed the world, and God is the creator. He's a genius, he's a master, he's a sovereign, but God found something, some particles, or whatever you want to call it, and God took these things and created, and no one else can do it, only God can do it. But he found certain things pre-existing, And from there, he created the world. That's called Kadmus, and it's an apikursis because we hold that the world was created absolutely yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. There was nothing around here that God used. It was a yesh me'ayin. If you learn the Ramban, as we learned in the Bereshit Shir, there's the Yuli. This particle that God created something from nothing. There was nothing here except God, and he created the Yuli. The idea, the very idea, and the very talk that the world existed in potential, but God had to make it into the physical world 5,781 years ago, you're already talking the language of Aristotle. You're already talking the language of something of some kind of nature existed before God created the world. It was only a potential thing, but it was here. And from that potential, God created finally the physical world. Even that idea that there's something potential that eventually realizes itself into something physical is a creation itself. And Rav Friedland, at the end of footnote 202, which we read, said very clearly, even ideas, concepts, God created. He created a crocodile, he created a tulip, he created a pomegranate, and he created ideas. This idea that first there's the potential, and then the potential can be realized into physical reality, is something that God created as an idea. This idea did not exist before God created the world. All ideas come when God creates the world. There's nothing that pre-existed, even this concept of potential. So God even had to create that idea, and with that idea, the world eventually comes into its physical reality. Okay, now we're on page Sada Gimel. And again, the Ramchal is going to talk about something that is really a Kabbalistic concept. We're going to read it as best as we can. Remember, the Ramchal had to be careful. Late as he turned to 21, 22, he was very young when he was writing these Svarim. He died when he was about 40 or so in a plague in Akko. So he had to be careful not to write openly Kabbalah because of certain bans, and Gedolim thought that he was Chas v'Sholom, Frankist, a Shabtai Tzvi, whatever Nebuch the ideas they came up with, they were wrong. But they banned him from writing Kabbalah. Some of his books were burned that were Kabbalah. We've talked about the Ramchal's story. So he was very careful when he wrote Kabbalah to write it in the language that would not sound too Kabbalistic. Rav Volbe is known to have said, it's brought down the Ale Shur, that I believe it's brought down the Ale Shur. Either Rav Volbe is saying it on his own, or it could be he's quoting Rav Friedlander, that the Mesilas Yesharim, which we all learn, and it sounds like a Musa Sefer, it sounds like a way to guide your life. The Gedolim are quoted as saying that the Mesilas Yesharim is actually the most complex Kabbalah Sefer that the Ramchal wrote. It's just Kabbalah, but written in superficial, simple language because of the bans that were placed on him. So here too, we're going to see a concept in Kabbalah. And for us, this is the concept that we spoke about many, many times, that the Ribono Shel Olam created the world with only one hashpah, toiv. And percolating inside the toiv is, the Ribono Shel Olam created the world with only hashpah toiv. And the Ribono Shel Olam's ultimate purpose in the world is lahativ, to do good. And even inside the Ra, even inside the Midas Hadin, we use the word percolating. Percolating under the surface is all toiv. Every event that occurs in the world is moving forward towards Mashiach Tzidkenu. Even an event that we can't understand. How can this possibly bring Mashiach closer? It looks like we're moving backwards. The Ramchal told us every step in the process of history is a move forward towards Mashiach Tzidkenu, because even if it looks like it's Ra, percolating inside there is only Toiv of the Rebbeinu Shalom to bring the worldly day ticket. So now we're going to get a fancy word, a Kabbalistic word, the Levushim, the garments, right? That's a Kabbalistic word that things have Levushim, things have garments. Just like a neshama has a garment. The garment of the neshama is the physical body. Inside this physical body that has all bodily desires, percolates in there a neshama. The guf is a garment to the neshama. And then we put garments on top of the guf to cover ourselves up. So it's garment on top of garment. So the same way that a guf is a garment for the neshama, things happen in the world that are garments to what's really happening inside. We take a look at the world, we see it superficially, we only see the garments, but inside the garments, there's something in there that's, you read between the lines, it's beneath the surface, it's beneath the garment, that's really what's really happening, except we can't see it, except for when we have, as we talk about many times, Rabbi Akiva type eyeballs. Otherwise, we only see the superficial. We see the garments. And we say, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge a person by what he's wearing. But we look at a person, we see what he's wearing, we see how he's dressed, and we make certain judgments about the person. The way he's dressed, what yarmulke he wears, what color shirt he wears, how he walks, where we make judgments about the book by its cover. And that's all the cover is a garment, and the true place where the person exists is in his neshama. And the whole world's like that. In Kabbalah, they have the concept of the klipa, the shell. But what's going on inside the shell? Inside the shell, there's a fruit. So the whole world has something called a lavush. It's a garment. Inside the garment is percolating only toiv. Okay. With that introduction, let's take a look at page Tzadik Gimel. Rav Friedlander wrote the caption, Hashpos Hashlemus, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being mashpia, emanations of perfection, emanations of only good to perfect the world. Musteris Belavushe Hahanhagos Bilti Shlemus, they are dressed up, Lavush. The perfection, bringing the world to perfection, doing only good to bring the world to perfection, is clothed or garmented in what appears to be a lack of perfection. There are events happening in the world that we think are the most distant thing from perfecting the world, and that's because of our eyeballs. Inside, that's just a garment, but inside there is a movement that's going to use this imperfection for perfection. God created a perfectly imperfect world so that we can perfect it. We've been saying that from the beginning of the Sefer. So percolating inside imperfection is a drive to use this imperfection for perfection. L'tzoyrech ha'avoda, in order that a human being can be an Oved Hashem. Be an Oved Hashem, you have to be able to deal with that outside imperfect world, to see beneath the surface, to see through the garment, and see what the perfection is in there that's moving towards Bias Goyal, and make your decisions accordingly. The whole world is here for avoida. The whole world, we said, is lahativ. God created the world to be mated, so that a person can get to Olam Haba. To get to Olam Haba, you make decisions through your Bechira. And that's how you get to Olam Haba. If there would be no Bechira and we would be all robots, we would all be the beneficiaries of lollipops. No matter what you did in your life, it doesn't make a difference. You had no freedom of choice anyway, so everybody get on the Olam Haba train. Everybody's going because nobody made any choices in their life. In order for a person to go to Olam Haba and feel good about his Olam Haba, as the Ramchal explained at the beginning of the Sefer, so it shouldn't be Nahama de Kisufa. You shouldn't have to eat bread of shame. You shouldn't have to eat on the dole. You shouldn't go to Olam Haba because charity gave you Olam Haba. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, here, take a little charity, go to Olam Haba. So this way we make choices in our life, and we get to Olam Haba through those choices. And getting to Olam Haba through those choices means not only do we have good, but we've earned the good and we feel good about the good. So this whole idea that the world superficially looks like it's completely imperfect, percolating inside there is a perfection that a person can see if he wants to, and drive and motivate himself to work with that perfection and bring the world to a state of perfection by Torah and mitzvahs. So a person can either be overcome by the outward appearances and live through outward appearances, or he can pierce the outward appearances, understand that there's something more important going on beneath the surface, and dedicate his life to perfecting the world, which is what's happening beneath the surface, or he can join forces with the superficial imperfections and enjoy life. Okay, we mentioned that the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim explains that the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. The Rambam explains that the original meaning of Tov and Ra in Lashon Kodesh means, Tov means beautiful, and Ra basically means ugly, something that's not so beautiful. The Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, Adam Rishon had a decision, the Rambam says. Man could have lived by Seichel. By Seichel means, let me think this through. Is it right or is it wrong? Adam Rishon had the capacity to live that life. And that's what life he was living for the short time before he ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. By eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, he brought into his life this idea of superficial beauty versus superficial lack of beauty. And that's how that's how his decisions were now made. Superficially, it looks good, it tastes good, it smells good, yeah, but it may not be healthy for you. It tastes wonderful, but it can kill you. It smells good, but it's not healthy to breathe it. It looks good, but you shouldn't be looking at it. Adam Rishon, by eating Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, the Rambam said, exchanged a life that could have been, which is it right or is it wrong, Seichel, and he exchanged it for Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. And you see that the way the Torah describes Chava looking at the tree. She saw the tree was Toiv Eitz L'Maichel, V'Taiva Hu Le'Nayim. It was so beautiful to the eye. It was such a beautiful tree. That's what the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra Chet did to Adam Rishon. He exchanged the life of rational, right versus wrong decision making for superficial. It looks good, tastes good, smells good. Yeah, I want it. So we live in a world now of levushim, garments. Things look beautiful, but they're off limits. You shouldn't go near them. They're things that taste good. You should not eat them. They're things that smell good. They're not healthy. But we now live in a world of levushim, of these garments, and we have a choice now to make for Avodas Hashem. Do we want to become allies with the garments? We want to join in with what looks good, tastes good, and smells good, and that's the chet of Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. So that's just continuing the chet. Or do we want to walk away from the garments and pierce the garment and pierce the shell and see what's going on inside? And inside is the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to perfect the world. And one of the ways you perfect the world is walking away from these superficially looking nice things or superficially tasting good things. You walk away from it because underneath the garment, it's not good for you. And now you're making a rational decision. Instead of living the superficial, it tastes good, I'm going to eat it. You pierce the shell and you look inside and you say, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu says I shouldn't eat it. Therefore, I'm not going to eat it even if it tastes good. So you pierce the superficiality of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. You're now living a life of seichel. God said, don't do it. So therefore, I'm not going to do it. And that's your avodas Hashem. Piercing the superficial shell and looking at what's going on beneath the surface inside the shell is avodas Hashem. So therefore, Friedlander says again in the caption, Hashpos hashlemus, the hashpah, the emanations of perfection, musteres are hidden, bilavushe, in the garments, hanhogas bilti shlemus, the world that runs and things happen that are not so perfect. L'tzarech havodah, all this, the shell with what's going on inside the shell is there for your avodas Hashem. You're going to live the shell, you're going to live the inside of the shell. La'asid lava yisalu hanhogas lanhogas hashlemus. La'asid lava b'meher v'yameinu. When the world comes to its tikkun, the shell will be completely broken, and what's inside, that perfection, that emanation of perfection, will bring the world to its state of perfection. So the Ramchal says, "V'odi'acha od inyan omuk b'davazeh." I'm going to now teach you a very deep concept on this subject, meaning the subject of how evil came into the world, and that evil is not an affirmative creation. Evil came about through a lack of hashpos hatoy, which we explained as we learned this several days. When we talked about God doesn't send anyone a heart attack. We all live on daily miracles, and when the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't send a miracle, there are ramifications. But we're not in a default setting to live forever, and God has to come and give someone a heart attack. That's not the setting we're living in. We're living in the setting that every second we're living by the grace of God. And when the grace of God, chas v'shalom, stops, life stops. So it's not that God sends evil to a person. It's God sending good to a person, and at some point, for whatever reason, God shuts off the tap. There's no water coming out. And this is the general understanding of the existence of the world in all its times. The root of everything is God had a will to send good, to do good for all the creations that he wanted to create. And therefore God created a system by which he can send a hashpah. That's also creation. The hashpahs hatoiv didn't pre-exist the world. Hashpahs hatoiv means to send good. Where are you going to send good to if nothing exists? So this idea of sending good is something that also came with the creation of the world. The Rebbeinu Shalom created this hashpahas hatoiv on the basis of what the creations would need for toiv. There would be creations that would need water, creations that would need oxygen. The Rebbeinu Shalom created all the hashpahas hatoiv based upon the needs of that which he wanted to create. Omnam, however, Mashachovitz Odom Baruch Hu Bashpah, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu will that there be hashpah, Hu Shatia Hashpah Shel Kedusha Mamash Mimenu Yisbarach Shu Etzem HaKedusha Machayra Umakayra V'ya told us hashpah Zois Rakan Yom Shel Kedusha Ukamoshu Gamata B'Malachim She'en Lam Shum Inyan Acha Kim Inyan Kedusha Gemura. What the Rebbeinu Shalom's will is that he should be able to directly be mashpia only the most wonderful, perfect toiv, and what comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is toiv that's holy. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is perfect in toiv, he's perfect in kedusha, and what he wants to be mashpia is perfect kedusha, perfect toiv, the kind of hashpah that he gave to malachim. He made, the Rosh Hashanah created angels, and the angels are the holy angels, different levels of holiness, Srofim, Ifanim, Chayis HaKodesh, at different levels of holiness. But the Malachim are Kodesh, they're holy. They don't have a Yetzer Hara. The hashpah that comes to Malachim is a hashpah of Kedusha. Some get higher levels of Kedusha, some get lower levels of Kedusha, but the Hashpah flowing from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Hashpah of Kedusha, because that's how he wants to send his Hashpah. The Rebbe Shalom is Kulei Kaddish, and his Hashpah is Kulei Kaddish. And we see that by Malachim. Kain ein hataklas hamachum b'chiddush hashpah zois ki im sheyushpa mikdushase yisparach shmei el nimtzah liyos nene miziv kdushase lo zulas. And that's Baruch Shalom's real will, to be mashpia, perfect kedusha to all creations, including man. But if he would do that, what would man be? Man would be a malach. The same way HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent a perfect hashpah of kedusha. Again, at different levels. Certain malachim are more kaddish than other malachim, but it was a pure hashpah of kedusha, and he sent this to the malachim. They became malachim. The Rebbe Shalom could have sent this to man. Man wouldn't be man. He would then be a malach. A malach is, for our purposes, perfect. We then get to the problem. If every human being is perfect, he has no bechira. If he has no bechira, there's no real olam haba, because you didn't earn it. Therefore, the hashpah that came to man had to be different than the hashpah that came to a malach. The malach became perfectly kaddish. So says the Ramchal, because God willed into creation this lower universe, it's a universe that has Netzah Das Tovara, a universe that has a Yetzer Hara. Therefore, God had to reduce the hashpah hatoiv that he sends to this world. If he sent the hashpah to this world that he sent to the world above, which created malachim, the world below would be malachim. There'll be no bechira and no olam haba, etc. HaKadosh Baruch Hu reduced, and again to use the word simtzum, he constricted that hashpah that comes to this world, and therefore it's not that perfect hashpah that creates perfect malachim. It creates lower level things, including gashmias, mundane items. It's certainly a reduction in the pure holiness of the original hashpah from God. It wasn't for this purpose that God created the hashpah. The hashpah was created to be perfectly holy, and that's from which malachim came. But it couldn't remain that way for this world, because then you wouldn't have this world as we know. We'd have another world of malachim. Therefore, we find now that we see that there is a hashpah in the world that brings about things that are not perfect and things that are gashmias. We see a hashpah that brings about apples, pomegranates, crocodiles, human desires that are healthy. We see that there's hashpahs that come down to this world that are not the same as the original hashpah of perfection that created malachim. The Rebbe Shalom had to constrict that hashpah that comes to this world so that it would be this world with a Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Das Tovara. A man would make decisions, a man would have bechira, and all of that is for the good, so that we can get olam haba that we earn instead of malachim who are perfect and make no choices. Neidish is eumiyut hashpah hashpah atzma shetzricha lehislabesh bedrochim eila shehem pchisos legabo. The original hashpah of perfect kedusha had to have a garment put around it, which we call gashmias, which we call the physical world, but in there is percolating that original perfect hashpah. And eventually, when we're zeicha to break the garment, to break the shell, that perfect hashpah is what we're going to see. And we're going to have the perfect world that we can get to Olam Haba for. And then we're talking about a world that looks like the world of Malachim, because in Olam Haba, there's no freedom of choice. In Olam Haba, there's no mitzvahs to do. There's no Yetzer Hara. That's the world of Olam Haba. It almost becomes the world of Malachim. But that's the world where the shell is cracked, the garments are removed, and the inside perfection that was always percolating inside now can be seen. This is what was God's intention, lahalbish, to dress up, Hashpa'aseh bedrochim hachashuchim eila. The Rebbeinu Shalom garmented, he clothed this perfect, beautiful, holy hashpah in a dark garment. For us, that would mean, for example, the neshama has been concealed, covered up, put in the shell of the body. Until the time comes where all these garments can be removed, and we can see in the whole world that it's all kedusha, and then it will be clear, and the true substance will be revealed. The entire creation and all the things involved in creation will then be purely Kodesh Hashem, purely holy to HaKadosh Baruch. Okay, stop here for today. We're on page Tzaddik Gimel. All those here that need Yeshua should have Yeshuas. All those here that need refuah should have refuahs. All you need a chamas should have the chamas. All you need brachas should have brachas. Brachas, shuas, the chamas, refuahs only come from the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Echad Yachim Yuchad. They can only come from him, through him, at the time he so decrees. And if he decides it should be done through a shliach, it will only be through the shliach that he decides upon. When we understand this and internalize it and live this, we're doing the Gilei HaYichud on our own, for our own selves, and through that we donate that Gilei Yichud for the Gilei Yichud of Klal Yisrael in the whole world. And when the Gilei Yichud comes to that point, critical mass, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said Mashiach today, B'Ritzonai HaToiv, to finish the Gilei Yichud, to bring us the Beis HaMikdash, we can bring Karbonos, we can bring the Maktis HaShekel to do his Avodah. Everybody, please take care of yourselves. Do what you need to do, when you need to do it, how you need to do it, with the seichel, to keep yourselves healthy and well, to greet Mashiach Tzidkenu in a healthy way, in a happy way, to dance with Mashiach Tzidkenu here. Amen. Before Shalem Moshe Zelik ben Rezel, before Shalem Yosef Chaim ben Shoshana Menucha, before Shalem Shlomo ben Simcha, before Shalem Liba Malka Bas Chaya Braina, Tomorrow, Me'etz Hashem, we'll continue the Gemara Shir at 9:30. Yeah, and at 10:15 we'll be going back to the Bereshit Shir. Everybody have a wonderful day. Sei gesund.